HOA Karen tries to evict me, didn't know I own her house. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. When I first moved into Ridgewood Estates, I expected the usual growing pains of settling into a new neighborhood, figuring out trash pickup days, getting to know the neighbors, and learning the unwritten rules of the community. What I didn't expect was a self-appointed dictator named Deborah Whitman who believed she had the final say over everyone's lives. From the moment I moved in, she made it clear that she had a personal vendetta against me, though I had no idea why. Maybe she didn't like homeowners who didn't bow to her authority. Maybe she had too much free time on her hands. Or maybe, just maybe, she had been waiting for someone to challenge her reign for years, and I had unknowingly become that person. It started small. Passive-aggressive notes about how my lawn wasn't trimmed to HOA standards, complaints about my trash bins being 1 inch too far from the curb, even a ridiculous warning about my porch light being too bright at night. Every week, there was a new complaint, a new warning, a new infraction that I was supposedly guilty of. At first, I played along, trimming the lawn, adjusting the bins, dimming the porch light, but nothing changed. Deborah had already decided that I didn't belong in Ridgewood Estates. Then, things escalated. One Tuesday morning, I checked my mail and saw an official-looking envelope stamped with the Ridgewood Homeowners Association, HOA, logo. Expecting yet another petty fine, I opened it only to find something even more absurd. An eviction notice. I blinked, then blinked again. I owned my house. There was no possible way the HOA had the authority to evict me. Yet there it was, printed in Deborah's usual condescending tone. Dear homeowner, after careful review, the HOA has determined that your property does not align with the established guidelines and aesthetic values of our community. Due to multiple infractions and ongoing disputes, we have initiated the process to have you removed from the premises. You have 30 days to vacate the property or face legal action. I laughed out loud. Legal action? The HOA didn't have the power to evict a homeowner from a property they owned outright. But then I saw the final line of the letter. Failure to comply may result in foreclosure proceedings. I froze. Foreclosure wasn't just an empty threat. Some HOAs had abused their authority, leveraging fines and obscure bylaws to push homeowners into financial distress, sometimes leading to actual foreclosure sales. The problem was that tactic wouldn't work on me. Deborah Whitman had no idea that I owned the very house she was living in. Yes, Deborah wasn't just my overbearing HOA neighbor, she was my tenant. Through a series of investment purchases I had made years ago, I had unknowingly become her landlord. I chuckled, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. She had just tried to evict the person who could legally evict her. I pulled up my property management files, and there it was, Deborah's lease agreement, signed and dated. My name, Michael Carter, sat right at the top as the legal property owner. I skimmed through the document, making sure there were no loopholes I had forgotten. Nope. Everything was airtight. Deborah wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a renter who had violated her lease. Harassment of other residents? Check. Unauthorized alterations to the property, HOA signs on the front lawn? Check. Interfering with legal property ownership? Oh, big check. I began drafting my response to her eviction notice, but halfway through, I stopped. No, this was too good to waste on an email. I needed to do this in person. If Deborah wanted a fight, I was going to give her a war. That afternoon, I took a slow walk toward Deborah's house, the house I owned. She was outside, as usual, nitpicking some poor neighbor about their garden fence being half an inch too high. She turned when she saw me, her expression immediately shifting into her smug, rehearsed look of superiority. I assume you got the notice, she said, folding her arms. It's nothing personal, but the HOA has made its decision. You don't fit the community standards, and we can't have that. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Oh, I got the notice, I said, reaching into my folder and pulling out a termination of lease agreement. Her confident smirk faltered. What is this? She asked, snatching the paper from my hands. I watched as her eyes scanned the words. It took a moment before realization hit, and when it did, her face went pale. This is a joke, right? She stammered. You can't do this, she protested, but I interrupted, smiling. See, Deborah, the house you're renting? It belongs to me. You sent me an eviction notice for a property I own, while failing to realize that you've been living in a property that I have the legal power to evict you from this entire time. Funny how that works, huh? Her hands shook as she clutched the papers, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She had no comeback, no excuse, no legal loophole to save her. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. I tilted my head, pretending to think. Maybe not. That depends on how you want to proceed from here. I took a step closer. I'm done playing games. You're either stepping down from your little HOA throne, or you're stepping out of my house. Either way, Deborah, your reign is over. Her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth, but I didn't wait for a response. I simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing there holding her own eviction notice in trembling hands. This was only the beginning. By the next morning, Deborah was in full denial mode. Despite holding a legally binding lease termination notice in her hands, she refused to believe I had the power to evict her. I could see it in her eyes. She was scrambling for an angle, searching for some technicality, some rule she could twist to avoid the reality of the situation. But the law wasn't on her side, and she had no idea just how airtight my case against her really was. Then, as expected, the HOA made its move. The very next morning, I received an email. I didn't even have to open it to know exactly who was behind it. The subject line read, Illegal eviction notice, violation of HOA bylaws. I sighed, already bracing myself for whatever nonsense Deborah had cooked up. When I opened the email, I nearly laughed out loud. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have engaged in unauthorized eviction proceedings against a resident of our community. The HOA has strict rules against retaliatory actions and unlawful displacement of residents. Any attempts to remove a member of this community without due process will result in immediate fines and further legal action. Please consider this your official warning. Sincerely, Ridgewood Homeowners Association Compliance Team. Immediate fines, legal action. Oh, this was rich. I almost had to admire her audacity. Deborah was clearly trying to weaponize the HOA's authority to protect herself, but what she failed to realize was that HOA rules don't override state landlord-tenant laws. She could cry to the HOA all she wanted, but it wouldn't change the fact that she was out of moves, and I was about to prove it. I wasn't evicting Deborah Whitman because I didn't like her. I wasn't violating any HOA bylaws. I was removing a tenant who had breached the terms of her lease, plain and simple. Still, I wasn't about to let this nonsense slide. If Deborah wanted to play games, then fine, I'd play right back. I drafted my response to the HOA's so-called warning. I kept it as professional as possible while making it clear that I wasn't backing down. Subject: Illegal eviction notice, violation of HOA bylaws. Dear HOA Compliance Team, thank you for your message. I appreciate your concern regarding unlawful evictions. However, Deborah Whitman is not a resident of this community in the sense you describe. She is my tenant. As the legal owner of her property, I have the right to terminate her lease for cause, which I have already done in full compliance with state and federal housing laws. My decision is not subject to HOA oversight. Furthermore, any attempts by the HOA to interfere with lawful landlord-tenant matters could be considered harassment, for which I am prepared to take legal action if necessary. Best regards, your favorite landlord. I hit send and sat back in my chair, satisfied. Deborah could try to weaponize the HOA all she wanted, but it wouldn't change the fact that she was out of moves, or so I thought. Later that afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. The moment I opened it, I saw 2 police officers standing on my porch. I immediately knew why they were there. Sir, we need to speak with you regarding a complaint, one of them said. I sighed, already exhausted by the sheer pettiness of the situation. "Let me guess," I said. "Deborah Whitman called you." The officers exchanged a glance. "She did," one of them admitted. "She claims you're attempting an unlawful eviction and that you're using intimidation tactics." I nodded, stepping aside. "Come on in, officers. I have plenty to show you." I pulled up everything: Deborah's lease agreement, the termination notice, the multiple lease violations. I even showed them the HOA's email and my response. The officers read through everything carefully before one of them sighed and looked at his partner. "This is completely legal," he muttered. "She's not being evicted unlawfully." The other officer nodded before turning back to me. "Sorry about this, sir. This happens more often than you'd think. Some people don't understand that HOA rules don't override property ownership." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I'm getting that impression." They left soon after, but before they did, one of them made sure to. As the officers walked away from my house, I saw them knock on Deborah Whitman's door. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but I caught the tail end of it. One officer, clearly irritated, firmly told her, "Ma'am, this is a civil issue, not a police matter. Don't call us again unless there's a real emergency." That was the first crack in Deborah's armor, but it wouldn't be the last. The next thing I did was file a formal legal notice with the court to move forward with her eviction. Once that paperwork was in motion, there was no stopping it. She had 30 days to leave, but I already knew she wasn't going to go quietly, and I was more than ready for whatever ridiculous stunt she was about to pull next. The deadline had come and gone, and despite everything, Deborah still hadn't packed a single box. She had spent the last 30 days throwing every desperate move she could think of to stall the inevitable. She filed a bogus harassment complaint against me, which was immediately dismissed when I provided the police with full documentation. She tried to get the HOA to intervene again, only to be met with silence after they finally realized they had no authority over a private landlord-tenant dispute. She even tried to find a loophole in her lease agreement, but the contract was airtight. And now, standing on her front porch, my property, she had nothing left but pure, seething rage. The sheriff's department arrived right on time. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicle, clipboard in hand, and walked straight to Deborah's door. I stood across the street, arms crossed, watching as she opened it. At first, she tried to keep her composure, but I saw the way her face twitched when she realized what was happening. This was real. There was no more stalling. No more technicalities. She was out. One of the officers cleared his throat and spoke in a firm, no-nonsense voice. "Ma'am, we're here to execute a court-ordered eviction. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises. Any remaining belongings will be removed by a locksmith and a cleanup crew." Her face twisted in outrage. "This is my home. You can't just..." The officer didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. This is his home." He turned and pointed directly at me. "You were given 30 days notice and multiple legal warnings. You are now trespassing on private property. If you do not comply, we will have no choice but to place you under arrest." That got her attention. Deborah, the almighty HOA enforcer, was now the one violating the law. She turned to me, desperation creeping into her voice. "You don't have to do this," she hissed. "We can work something out." Deborah's fingers trembled as she clutched the eviction notice, her face shifting through a kaleidoscope of emotions: anger, disbelief, desperation. Her lips parted, then closed, then parted again as if her brain was scrambling for one last argument, one last excuse to escape the inescapable. Her voice came out weak, almost pleading. "Look, we can work something out," she said, swallowing hard. "I can drop the complaints, I can." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms over my chest. "Oh, now you want to negotiate?" I said, my voice laced with mock amusement. After trying to kick me out of my own home, after dragging me through bogus fines, police calls, and HOA nonsense, she opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance to finish whatever excuse she was about to make. I shook my head. "No, Deborah," I said, my voice sharp. "Finally, you made your bed. Now lie in it." Her expression crumbled into pure disbelief. For the first time, I saw it. Realization hit her like a freight train. She had lost everything. The lies, the mind manipulations, the power games had all led to this moment, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her perfectly controlled mask cracked. For a moment, I thought she might actually accept reality. She stomped back inside, shoulders rigid, hands clenched into tight fists. I could feel the storm of rage brewing beneath her surface, but I assumed, foolishly, that she'd at least go quietly. I should have known better. Through the open door, I suddenly heard a loud crash. One of the officers jerked his head up. "Ma'am, step away from the property," he shouted, already moving toward the house. But Deborah had lost it. A second crash, followed by the sound of shattering glass. I took a step forward, peering inside. She was ripping the house apart. She knocked over picture frames, sending glass flying across the hardwood floor. She kicked a chair, sending it skidding across the room. She yanked drawers open like a deranged raccoon, tossing their contents onto the ground. And all the while, she screamed obscenities, her voice raw with fury. The officers were inside in seconds, one stepping in front of her with his hands raised. "Ma'am, stop right now." She whirled on them, wild-eyed, her breath ragged. "This is my home," she screeched. "You have no right to do this." I sighed, rubbing a hand down my face. "She's really going out like this, huh?" I muttered. One of the officers turned to me. "Would you like to press charges for property damage?" he asked. Oh, how tempting that was. But no. I had one, and I wasn't about to drag this out any longer than necessary. "Not unless she breaks something major," I said. "I just want her out." The officer nodded and turned back to Deborah. "You have 5 minutes to collect your belongings and leave," he said, his voice firm. "Or we will escort you out ourselves." 15 minutes later, Deborah stomped down the steps of my house, dragging a single battered suitcase behind her. Her face was red, whether from rage or humiliation, I couldn't tell. She glared at me, and for a brief moment, I saw one last spark of defiance in her eyes. She opened her mouth as if she was about to say something, one last insult, one final pathetic attempt to regain some dignity. But nothing came, because there was nothing left to say. With a harsh exhale, she turned, got into her car, and sped off without another word. The officer beside me secured the house, changing the locks as I signed off on the final paperwork. And just like that, it was over. Deborah Whitman, the nightmare of the neighborhood, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the woman who had made it her mission to rule Ridgewood Estates with an iron fist, was finally gone. I stood on my front porch, letting out a long, satisfied breath. For the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I felt peace. No more bogus fines. No more threats. No more battles over community standards. It was over. An unexpected invitation came the next morning. As I sipped my coffee on the porch, my phone buzzed with a new email. I tapped the screen, frowning as I read the subject line: HOA Board Vacancy, Invitation to Apply. I opened the email, and as I read, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Dear homeowner, due to recent vacancies, there is now an open seat on the Ridgewood Estates HOA Board. As a valued member of the community, we would like to extend an invitation for you to apply for this position. Sincerely, Ridgewood HOA Board." I shook my head, still laughing. Deborah's house was empty, the neighborhood was quiet, and now they wanted me to replace her? I closed the email without replying and went about my day, because I knew without a doubt that I was never going to join that corrupt board. But I'd enjoy knowing that, wherever Deborah was, she was probably miserable, knowing she had lost everything. And that was enough. The story of Deborah Whitman is more than just an entertaining tale of poetic justice. It is a cautionary tale about power, accountability, and the consequences of unchecked authority. At its core, this story highlights the abuse of power, the importance of standing up for oneself, and the inevitable downfall of those who manipulate authority for personal gain. Through the events that unfolded, we can extract valuable lessons applicable not only to HOA conflicts, but also to life, leadership, and human nature. 1. Power is not absolute, it must be justified and fair. One of the most striking aspects of this story is how Deborah Whitman weaponized her position in the HOA to impose arbitrary rules and unreasonable demands on homeowners. She believed that because she held authority, she could use it however she pleased, without accountability or fairness. This is a classic example of misplaced power. Throughout history, figures who misuse their authority, whether in small communities, businesses, or even governments, often believe that their position entitles them to control others. But true leadership isn't about forcing compliance, it's about guiding with fairness, reason, and integrity. Deborah, like many authoritarian figures, made the critical mistake of assuming that her power was limitless. She ignored legal boundaries and assumed her word was final. However, power without legitimacy is fragile. The moment Michael challenged her authority with the law, she crumbled. Lesson: power is only as strong as the foundation it stands on. Without fairness, accountability, and legitimacy, it will inevitably collapse. 2. Know your rights. Knowledge is the best defense. One of the main reasons Michael was able to fight back against Deborah was that he understood his rights. Many homeowners fall victim to abusive HOA practices simply because they don't know the law. HOAs often try to bully residents with excessive fines, obscure bylaws, and threats of legal action, hoping that people will comply out of fear. But Michael wasn't intimidated because he knew the law was on his side. By thoroughly reviewing his property management records and lease agreements, he found the loophole Deborah overlooked. She was, in fact, his tenant. This single fact shifted the entire power dynamic, proving that knowledge is one of the most powerful tools when facing adversity. Had Michael been uninformed or afraid, Deborah could have bullied him into submission, using HOA rules as a weapon to push him out of the neighborhood. But instead, he used the very system she relied on against her. Lesson: understanding your legal rights and responsibilities is the most effective way to protect yourself from being manipulated or taken advantage of. Knowledge is power. 3. Arrogance leads to downfall. No one is above the law. One of Deborah's biggest weaknesses was her arrogance. She had spent so long controlling the HOA, dictating how the neighborhood should be run, and intimidating homeowners that she began to believe she was untouchable. Her arrogance made her overconfident, and in that overconfidence, she made fatal mistakes. She never considered the possibility that Michael had legal leverage over her. She assumed that the HOA's power was absolute. She believed she could manipulate the system indefinitely without consequence. But no one is above the law. The moment Michael pushed back with legally sound documentation, Deborah's house of cards came crashing down. Lesson: arrogance blinds people to reality. No matter how much power someone believes they have, it will eventually come crashing down if it's not grounded in fairness and respect for the law. No matter how powerful someone believes they are never untouchable. The law applies to everyone, and eventually, the abuse of power will catch up to those who wield it unjustly. 4. Consequences are inevitable. You reap what you sow. Deborah spent years making life miserable for the people around her, imposing petty fines, forcing ridiculous HOA rules, and abusing her position. She never thought those actions would have real consequences, but in the end, her own actions led to her downfall. She pushed too hard against the wrong person. She ignored warning signs that her authority was not as absolute as she believed. She underestimated the strength of the legal system and the determination of someone who had been wronged. When she realized she had lost, she resorted to destruction and rage. But even that didn't change the inevitable outcome. She was still evicted, humiliated, and stripped of the power she once wielded. Her own actions brought about her downfall, no one else's. Lesson: actions have consequences. Those who build their power through manipulation, intimidation, and deceit will eventually have to face the reality of their choices. 5. Revenge is best served legally and ethically. Michael could have resorted to underhanded tactics. He could have used bribery, threats, or personal attacks against Deborah. But he didn't. Instead, he let the law work in his favor. This is an important lesson. The best way to win against someone abusive isn't through revenge, it's through justice. By handling the situation legally and methodically, Michael ensured that Deborah's downfall was entirely her own doing. He didn't need to lie, cheat, or manipulate. He simply used the rules she thought she could control against her. This kind of justice-driven revenge is far more satisfying than any petty act of retaliation. It sends a clear message. If you abuse power, it will eventually turn against you. Lesson: the best way to handle injustice is through ethical, legal means. Let the truth and the law be your greatest weapons. 6. Some people never learn, and that's okay. Even as she was being evicted, Deborah refused to accept responsibility. She begged, threatened, screamed, and destroyed property, but she never admitted she was wrong. This is typical behavior from people who abuse power. Instead of self-reflection, they blame everyone but themselves. But here's the truth: you can't force people to change. Some people will never acknowledge their faults, no matter how clear the evidence is, and that's okay. Michael didn't waste time arguing with her or trying to convince her to change. He simply let her choices lead to their natural consequences and moved on. Lesson: you don't need to change toxic people. You just need to remove their influence from your life, let them face the consequences of their actions, and move forward without them. 7. True victory is moving on. The final email from the HOA inviting Michael to replace Deborah on the board was the ultimate irony. They went from fighting him to wanting him to take over. But Michael's response? He laughed and ignored it. Why? Because he had already won. The real victory wasn't taking over the HOA, it was getting rid of the toxicity in his life. At the end of the day, winning a battle means nothing if you stay in the war. True victory is walking away, knowing you've reclaimed your peace. Lesson: the best revenge is not just defeating your enemy, it's moving on and living better without them. The downfall of Deborah Whitman is a lesson in power, justice, and accountability. Her story is a reminder that abusing authority will always have consequences, that knowledge and patience are powerful weapons, and that true victory isn't about revenge. It's about freedom from toxicity through calm, calculated legal action. Michael not only protected himself, but also removed a destructive force from his life. And in the end, that's what matters most. Deborah thought she was untouchable, but the law and karma had other plans. If you find this story interesting and valuable, don't forget to like the video to support me. Comment below with your thoughts on the lessons from this story. Have you ever met someone like Deborah? How would you handle this situation? Remember to share the video to spread the story to your friends and those who can learn valuable lessons. And especially, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Click the notification bell to stay updated as soon as there is a new video. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.